Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fundamentalist Fails. I'm Mark Reed, and I'll be your host for the madness of the Tower of Babel. You know it's true because everything else is a fairy tale, and my camera is insanely blurry. I do feel a bit blurry this morning, I do have to admit. I do feel a bit of the blur. I do apologize, I started slightly late. I have been obsessed with a certain story in the news, but that's okay, pushing right along. So what we have today is a wild Babel tale from my friends Answers in Genesis. So Fundamentalist Fails looks at the absurdity of the fundamentalist religious crew and all of the stories that they put out. Now, Answers in Genesis is one that, it's a gift that just keeps on giving. It really is hilarious just how wrong they are about just about, well, and not about everything. They do say that flat Earth is false, which, it's something, I guess. But, as far as age of Earth, as far as evolution, as far as all of the science of this stuff, it's hilariously, appallingly, catastrophically wrong. The flood, the whole thing. I really don't know. But we've got this video. It is a little bit of an older one. I did put it away a while back. It's basically the video about the Tower of Babel will blow your mind. Do you have a mind? Is it unblown? Do you want it to be blown? Well, Answers in Genesis have the perfect video for you. This Tower of Babel video will blow your mind. So prepare for mine to be blown. I don't know who the presenter is. I don't think it really matters. He's just one of their generic, let's say, lackeys that does the promotion of, unsound scientific facts, facts for God, so for Jesus. So do leave a like and subscribe. I do want to try and grow the channel and help me get to 3K, where I will immediately quit my job and retire a rich man. I joke. It's going to make no difference really, but that's okay. That's all right. So I will share with you this, and a big thank you to everybody for tuning in. Let's get it up, and let's start on this. So, where am I? I've lost myself. There we go. Okay, fantastic. So this video, be prepared. It will blow your mind. Okay, it's promised. It has a promise, and that's an ironclad Answers in Genesis promise that this Tower of Babel video will blow your mind. So if your mind remains unblown, I'm sorry. You can take it up with Answers in Genesis. I didn't make that promise, okay? I wasn't the one telling you that your mind will be blown. That's all Answers in Genesis. Wow. Look, Answers in Genesis never said their answers were true, okay? But that's an ironclad guarantee.
Was the Tower of Babel a myth?
Yes, it was. Yes, 100% a myth. Yes, 100%. Like, there is no, like, people did not in that time frame build a tower that high, especially since, so if you want to ask, right, so the timeline goes, you have Noah's flood, right, so that's very, very close to the Tower of Babel. How long, you ask? Well, I believe it was under 100 years, or about 100 years. Flood to Tower of Babel, and so you got to ask, obviously, there is a timeline of population that has the Tower of Babel being built by this huge civilization, roughly 100 years after 8 people are left on the Earth. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but in order to get the thousands and thousands and thousands of people required to build this thing, because it can't just be the builders, right? You've got to grow food, and you've got to, have services, you've got to have water, you've got to have all this stuff. In order to get there, over 100 years from 8 people, I don't, I'm not a mathematician, but they would have had to have litters of children, like just, hundreds of children each. And I don't think humans can do that. So the basic timeline is absolutely screwed. Like 8 people, 100 years later, they're building the largest tower in history. Like, I'm sorry, it just does not work. It doesn't work. And then you add to that, like a few hundred years after that, you have the Assyrian Empire, which has like 1 million people at its height. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Either, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. So yes, 100% a myth. Yeah. Yeah, good night, yeah, absolutely noise. Yeah, no. Is it a myth? Yes, we all know it. Yeah, it's a myth. It's a myth. Look, there might be based in some kind of event in reality, right? Like, you might say, okay, they tried, you know, there was a large city, and over time, maybe the legend grew, but no, like, the entire timeline from Flood, the Tower of Babel, to Assyrian Empire, no, it's not working. It doesn't work with biology.
A lot of people still think of it in biblical terms as some kind of legend.
You're dealing with legendary material.
Most people, even most Christians, think it's some kind of legend, yes. And this is what AiG gets really, really upset about. They're like, no, we've got to take the Bible and its wild, insane stories as absolute fact. So this had to have happened like the Bible says. People literally building a tower to heaven. Okay. It doesn't work though, because if you take the flood as fact and there's 8 people left, and then you take the Tower of Babel 100 years later, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Is it myth?
The Bible says it really happened.
But they don't really know that it actually...
Yeah, I know. Well, the Bible doesn't say it really happened. Right? It doesn't, the Bible doesn't have in it like, oh, this is the Tower of Babel story, which it really, really happened. Like, the Bible doesn't say that. It just has a story. Right? Like, it doesn't say, hey, this is the creation of the universe, which, trust me, bro, actually happened. The Bible doesn't say that. Oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I have to make an apology to all the natalists out there who apparently I've gotten really worked up about talking about, you know, litters of children. Look, all the quiverful people are actually going insane right now, so, yeah, please restrain from making children just until we can work out whether we've got fertilizer and food for everybody, okay? Just hold off for 1 second on making shitloads of children until we work out that we've got the resources for them. Thank you. Thank you.
Existed.
The first great city on Earth.
And there's evidence for it, both.
The first great city on Earth. Well, that's purely subjective, isn't it? I mean, there were other cities beforehand. I know this because God smote a couple of them before this. So, yeah. Yeah, and I think Cain's children went off to live in another city kind of thing, right? Like, they went up to, was it the first great city? Depends how you define great, but apparently 100 years after the flood, which killed everybody bar 8 people, there was enough people to be the greatest city on Earth. Not sure about that one. The math ain't mathin'.
In and outside Scripture.
When they were building it, it was never finished.
This ancient account is identical to the biblical story.
Yeah, no, that's not identical to the biblical story. So somewhere, somebody didn't finish a city, and that means that the biblical story of the Tower of Babel is all exactly correct. That they did in fact build a tower that was supposed to reach heaven, that everybody spoke one language, and, you know, the languages were confused, which isn't how language works, right? Like, that just literally isn't how language works. Like, this is the thing. Just because somebody once didn't finish a city doesn't mean that everything in that story is true, right? Like, it doesn't mean that. What?
Which is a very convincing piece of evidence.
We live in a culture that is dominated by a secular worldview. And
Well, is it dominated by secular worldview? It depends. I mean, I think that the US is dominated by Christian culture. I think it is. You know, it's kind of weird that you know, people will ask you what church you go to and just assume that you're a Christian. I think it's wild just because the majority are Christian. But there's a reason why the culture is, or the political system is supposed to be secular. It's because when you start to give power to one religion, they will enforce the following of that religion on all the population, and they will end up making a religious political system which isn't good for anybody. It isn't good for anybody. Because, you know, when you start to enforce religion, other religions will stop. And then you have the problem of which denomination enforces the religion, because they all believe different stuff. So there's a reason why it's secular, and it's not just, oh, everybody hates Christianity. No, that isn't the reason. The reason is because we cannot decide which of the religions, denominations, even, you know, which particular church has the right view. So essentially what we do is say that they're all equal, and the deciding factors ought to be, or at least in theory, should be secular, not to favour any one religion, and therefore cause resentment among every other religion and group. That we say, hey, that the religion that you follow should be a matter of conscience, not of political standard or legal standard. And the problem comes that when you put one religion or even one denomination in power, they will invariably use that power to enforce their religious belief, their religious following. And so from the start of the Enlightenment, John Locke, who was a Christian, right? John Locke was a Christian, but he said that religious belief should be a matter for the conscience, not for a political choice. It should be a matter for your conscience, and that's all. And that is the hallmark of a secular system. It doesn't prevent Christianity. Brian Osborne here, he gets to, you know, wax lyrical on his Tower of Babel all he wants. He's fully free to do that. And I would say you are free to do that. I would take exception at some of the things that he's saying are facts. I would disagree. And I have the freedom to say, hey, you're wrong. Brian, you're completely wrong, and the Tower of Babel is a legend, as it's written in the Bible. Now, am I saying that, hey, during that time, a city that was built was never finished? No, I'm not saying that. I'm sure there were many cities that were never finished. But what I am saying is that, I'm sorry, but 8 people from the flood, 100 years and change later, suddenly there's enough people to build a tower to heaven? I'm really sorry, mate. That is just ridiculous. That is not how biology works. And with languages, you know, everybody speaking one language and suddenly overnight they all speak different languages. I'm sorry, but that's not how languages work. Languages work like evolution. And I know, like, trust me, wait for the evolution stuff. Brian has issues with evolution, even though Brian here is just a Answers in Genesis author and speaker. He's got no credentials, but then again, neither do I. But hey, he gets to voice his opinion, I'll voice mine. But languages work like evolution. They basically have, like, if you have a group of people that are all together, they'll all speak the same language. That's how social stuff works. We speak the same. But if you isolate a certain, like, element, they will begin to branch off. They will have their own dialects. It's really interesting. At the moment, they're sort of pointing to, I think it's Seattle in America, as a place where language is kind of splitting off, and they sort of see a dialect forming, which is really fascinating, right? And areas that are in their own group for a long time, like, for instance, England with all of its dialects, right? You have the standard sort of Wessex upper class posh English accent is completely different than Scouser, which is like the west of the country. It's actually fascinating. But it works like evolution. You get populations that are isolated to themselves. They'll create dialects. Languages will split off. And we have the Romantic languages to prove that. Spanish, English. Is English a Romantic language? I know Spanish is. Italian is. Anyway, there's a few of them. French is the other one, yes. So these three Romantic languages, they all came from Latin. All three of them. But they're vastly different now. And that didn't just happen overnight. They split apart from one another. But don't worry, Brian Osborne is an Answers in Genesis author and speaker, so he will catch you up with the facts, allegedly.
It's not neutral. It assumes the Bible is wrong. It puts its ultimate faith in the ideas of man.
No, it doesn't assume that the Bible is wrong. It just is explaining that the text is it's a legend concerning something that probably happened. There was probably a city, it didn't get finished, and then legends grow around it. When you say Bible is wrong, you're basically saying that none of the things in there are true. Whereas when you're looking at history, you're trying to sort out what is fact from what is legend or mythology or anything like that. It's not like this black and white thinking of, well, it's all wrong or it's all true. No, that's not how we look at things. You know, Jerusalem is a place. Bethlehem's a place. These places existed. There were probably people that were there. These people had names. Some of them mentioned in the Bible. Other people may be fictional. Other people may be based upon a real person, but have a fictional account of their life. It's not black and white. It's not Bible is all correct or Bible is all false. That's not how we look at things.
We've been taught that the Bible is just a book of myths. So our culture has rejected biblical history and embraced the fairy tale of evolution. And I call it a fairy tale, not to be snarky, but because when you look at what it really is, it's a fairy tale.
Okay, so, right, and I'm sorry, this always makes me laugh, right? The fairy tale of evolution. Yes, so on one hand, we've got the most scientifically tested theory of all time. Like, it has been tested more than any other scientific theory in history and made overcome novel testable predictions that it's overcome with flying colors. It has been reliable, has predicted things again and again and again, and is used as one of the bedrocks for medicine. And on the other hand, we have a story about how two people were in a special garden and a talking snake convinced a woman to eat a magic fruit. Okay, I'm not a betting man, but if I was to put down some money on which of those two things are true, I think I would go with the scientifically tested theory. Like the fairy tale. Have you read your Bible? Like, I'm sorry, it's got talking snakes, talking donkeys, magical things happening, the sun stopping in the sky, which would cause the earth to stop rotating. My guy! Like, seriously. It's got people blowing down the walls of a city with a trumpet. Like, yeah, but evolution, the thing that we have masses of scientific evidence for is the Sure, yeah, no, right.
You see, in evolution, people are taught that around 13.8 billion years ago, everything began when nothing exploded and made.
Yeah, okay. So it's not nothing that okay. Just quickly, and I do want to give a big shout out. Thank you so much, Left-Handed Jedi. You are a scholar, sir. You can Babel my tower anytime. That I don't know why I said that. Somebody stop me. Somebody shut this stream down. Shut this stream down. That was terrible. I apologize to everybody involved, everybody listening, and everybody related to me. That was absolutely terrible. I do sincerely apologize. But something I don't have to apologize for is Left-Handed Jedi with 5 readerships. Thank you so much, Jedi. You are awesome. Those go out to, excuse me 1 second. Those go out to Ilda, Knives, Ben, Hooks. That was terrible. I'm sorry. Spooky, Bird, Hair. Spooky, I've known Spooky for ages. Like, Spooky used to get on my case ages ago, years ago. What a guy. Yeah, awesome. Doom-based. And Eve _ L, unless that's, no, that's an L. Okay, I thought it might be an I. Apology not accepted. Oh, god damn it. Like, seriously. How dare you? But thank you so much, Left-Handed Jedi. At least you are making up for it by providing the people what they want. And what they want is emojis and other benefits. Thank you so much, Jedi. And to those new members, enjoy your emojis and other benefits. Yesterday I did a member stream, a members only stream. Really cool. I just talking with Lil of All Trades. Big shout out to Lil and Joe from the Kentucky Atheist. Just really interesting conversations. Usually I'll just casually chill and play some games or something, but it was a really interesting conversation that I really enjoyed. So that was cool. But yeah, you get access to all of that stuff. Just as a big thank you for supporting the channel and being just all round awesome people. Thank you so much. Bastet, blessing on all. Are you calling me a Bastet? How dare you? How dare you? And yeah, Left-Hand Jedi, no, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the point. When you're sort of sitting there going, well, nothing can't exist, then why are you saying that something came from, like, what is nothing? Because as soon as you're identifying it as something, it's not nothing anymore. Like, as far as we know, nothing can't exist because nothing is the state of non-existence. Fixed it. Banned Mark. He's banned. Oh, awesome. 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 Yeah, no, ban me. Look, out of all the people that cause trouble on this channel, I'm probably the main culprit, to be honest with you. So, you know, really it's self-inflicted at this point. But yeah, nothing can't exist because the state of existence is in opposition to nothing, so it can't exist. Tracy Harris used to do this fantastic sort of, can you give me an example of nothing? And that's along those lines, because as soon as you say nothing, you're saying it can't be something. And they think that this is a gotcha, saying that, oh, Lawrence Krauss wrote a book that's universe from nothing, and a lot of the problems stem from that one book title, which is kind of a sales gimmick. I mean, it's a great title for a book. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Lawrence Krauss. I think his behavior has been appalling. You know, just a horrible person all round. And, you know, that title was designed to sell books, but they think it's an actual got you. Whereas in physics, when they're talking about nothing, they're talking about a state of no energy, no matter, and no energy, no matter, and no time, right? So we're really talking about a quantum vacuum, like something that is just quantum particles, that is just like quantum foam, quantum particles with no space, no time, and sort of just I'm trying to think of the name for it, but anyway, there's sort of these particles. It's not hadrons, it's something else, but anyway, like, they're just talking about a empty space with quantum particles in it. It counts as nothing because in classical physics, something has to be energy or matter or whatever. But in sort of quantum physics, something can exist just being quantum particles. And in classical physics, it's nothing because it doesn't have all the attributes that we associate with something. Like, because when you have something, you have energy. Like, you know, there's nothing without energy. But they conflate it with of course, the philosophical nothing, which means, oh, I have nothing to do with that. There is nothing over there. Like a abstraction of nothing. Timeless, spaceless, zero energy. Yeah. Yes, but in that you can have quantum particles. You can have virtual particles. You can have particles that are in a quantum state, whereas they're not energy, but they are there. And that's the current thinking. So when we talk about it, and it was explained to me inaccurately, but a way that I could understand it, because quantum mechanics is just, like, that boggles my mind. It should boggle your mind. It's so counterintuitive that it should. Like, I think there was a quote by somebody that sort of said, if quantum mechanics doesn't make you angry, then you're not understanding quantum mechanics. You know, like, it really is that counterintuitive. But somebody once explained it to me, sort of inaccurately, but sort of a way you can get your head around it, is if you have matter and antimatter and you put it together, it annihilates, making virtual particles, quantum particles, right? Like, there's no matter and there's no antimatter. It's just these quantum elements, these fundamental elements that have been released. Now, that in reverse could create a universe. If you just had quantum particles and they change in such a way, or they collapse in such a way that can create something. And so that's how it was explained to me. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but I can understand that when you have matter and antimatter, they basically cancel out. But there's not nothing when annihilation happens. There's quantum particles. So, but yeah, the whole thing of a universe can't explode from nothing, the question is, what do you mean by nothing? Because if you're talking about quantum particles, then you're wrong. You know, and it's not explode, it rapidly expands from sort of a quantum state. Or quantum plasma, I believe, is the name for it.
Everything created the universe. This idea violates many laws of science. And then from there, from the chaos of an explosion or rapid expansion, you get the orderliness of the universe, galaxy.
Well, at least he put in rapid expansion. Yeah, okay. Look, nobody's saying it was created from, right? Like, so creation from implies that something is causing this or making this intentionally. Like, that's the problem. It formed, right? Like, it formed from the natural laws of the universe, which we are investigating. And quantum plasma is something that we are investigating, right? But the hypothesis, and, you know, Big Bang Theory only covers the expansion of the universe, like from a singularity to the universe we have today, the world we see around us. It doesn't cover cosmogony, which is the origin of everything. Right? It only talks about from the singularity onwards. It doesn't say where the singularity came from. It doesn't address that at all. So the quantum plasma that they think was there, you know, to say something created it from that is not accurate. It formed from that. Right? Like, it's not, it's like saying, well, our Earth was created by this. No, the Earth formed as a result of gravity upon particles. It's not something external coming in and mushing it together. It's the system forming how it naturally forms according to natural laws. Yeah. Yeah, no, I've heard the same, Saf. I've heard the same. If you think you understand quantum physics, it means you don't understand. I wouldn't say I understand it. I have a loose grasp of it. I'll put it that way. I know that there's people in the community that have a way better grasp than I do. Leophilius knows a lot more than me. Ember knows a lot more than me. I have a loose grasp on it.
These solar systems. This violates many other known laws of science as well. And then somehow, life comes from non-life.
It does not violate any known laws of science. If, you know, I feel like he's about to throw out the second law of thermodynamics. No, it does not violate that at all. It doesn't violate that at all, in any way. It doesn't. There are laws of physics that seem to be violated on a quantum level, like all the time. You know, it just means that our classical laws of physics are not married up. They're not compatible with quantum physics, right? Like, we cannot apply the normal laws of physics on a quantum scale. And that doesn't mean that the universe is broken. It just probably means that we haven't found a GUT, which is a grand unified theory, something that marries the quantum physics to the normal physics. And that's sort of the holy grail of physics, is people finding one set of mathematical equations and laws that unifies the two into a coherent model. And it's just probably a limitation with our model, not a problem with the reality or a requirement for a divine magic man or something. No, it just means that our models, while accurate, are not complete. That's it. And will probably never be complete.
That's unscientific. Information comes from inanimate matter, also unscientific. And then somehow, natural selection and mutation.
I don't think that's unscientific. I know there's a law of biogenesis, which means that the law of biogenesis was sort of to counter and what's sort of hilarious is that back before sort of Louis Pasteur, people and religious people were promoting this idea of spontaneous generation. Right, so the question was, well, why did bread get mold on it? Where did that come from? Why did organisms suddenly appear in ponds? Like they didn't understand why they suddenly appeared, even though they didn't see anything there. This was sort of before microbes were discovered, and people like Pasteur sort of proved that in a sealed container you wouldn't get this forming. Right, like you wouldn't get that generation of microbes. So they came up with a law of biogenesis. That means that life doesn't just spontaneously generate, but whether life can, under certain conditions, arrive from non-organic chemicals is a different story. That's abiogenesis, and the law of biogenesis was never meant to address that question. It was just that, hey, if mold forms, it isn't just spontaneously coming out of nowhere. It has to have a living thing to transmit its DNA and its genetic material in order to create that life. It just doesn't, frogs just don't spontaneously appear from nowhere. There has to be an egg. Germs don't just appear in your body. It has to have a transmission vector. That's all it's there to address. But they've sort of said, no, so that eliminates abiogenesis. No, it doesn't. No, it 100% doesn't. It's just meant to address one accepted science at the time, mostly pushed by religious people, that life just spontaneously arose, on bread when it got moldy, or from ponds when frogs appeared. That's all it is.
Which really duplicate, shuffle, or lose pre-existing genetic information. These things miraculously add brand new genetic information over time, changing a fish into a philosopher. And eventually you get some...
that is one of the most inaccurate graphics I have ever seen in my entire life. Like, that is so bad, I'm going to watch it twice. Just to... Let's go through it slowly. Can we? Oh no, we're going to skip too far. Let's slow this down and see. Let's slow this down. Let's go for 0.5. Okay, so the fish turns into a tetrapod. Which, okay, so that face is way too human for an amphibian. Like, seriously, are you even kidding me? I don't know why it has a human face. This is 100% cursed.
Brand new
I think according to his theory of of evolution, we turned into Gollum at some point. Apparently, Gollum with a tail at some point.
Information over time.
What is this? I mean, this doesn't even look like a monkey. Right, monkey don't have those kind of feet because they're not bipedal. They don't have those kind of arms. What am I looking at here? What the hell am I looking at? This is... What is... If Screen Ocean is an AI program, I'm going to be so disappointed in this guy. What is Screen Ocean? I don't know, but I am very, 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 very wary. Very wary. Oh, it's a stock footage and media licensing company. Okay, your stock footage sucks. Okay, yeah, accurate, yes, yes. This is how Stephen Miller happened. This is what Stephen Miller looks like when he sees an illegal immigrant. Okay, that's what he looks like. He grows a tail and gets very, very serious.
I'm changing a fish into a
Yeah, look. This is so inaccurate. It's
philosopher.
incredible.
And eventually you get some sort of money.
Well, okay, so, and again, I've brought this up many times in the past. I'll bring it up again. When he says a fish to philosopher, or what is Donnie from Standing for It, he keeps saying fish to fisherman, right? There's no such thing as a fish, right? People use the term fish very generally, okay? There's no category in biology as fish, right? Okay, so just understand that. When we say fish, it's like saying vegetable, right? Like there is no category in biology such as vegetable. Okay, there's a series of things that colloquially we put in a group because it makes sense to us. There are categories that are separated into lobe-finned fish and ray-finned fish, and they're very, very different, right? They're incredibly different. So lobe fins are the ones like you're seeing in that original picture, like the coelacanth, right? The ancient fish. They've got fins that come off their body. The ray-finned ones are like manta rays and things like that, right? They have more of a different fin arrangement than the lobe-finned fish. Now, it is interesting, really interesting, that we are closer genetically, biologically, to lobe-finned fish than lobe-finned fish are to ray-finned fish. Okay, so like when we look at fish in general, right, we lump all of them in the same thing, like manta rays with coelacanth, with tadpoles, with goldfish, with, all of that stuff. But what I want you to realize is that because of our evolutionary line, we are actually closer related to those lobe-finned fish than those lobe-finned fish are to manta rays. Yeah. And that makes sense because the split between different types of fish happened billions of years ago, right? Like they split off way early. And if we came from lobed-finned fish, or an ancestor of the modern lobed-finned fish, that went to tetrapods, amphibians, reptiles, etc., 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 all of those diversity, then we would expect to be closer to those fish genetically than the ones that split off way before, the ray-finned fish. But what's interesting is that the reason why we're closer to them is because the split off between the lobe-finned fish and us, mammals basically, and it's not just, hey, a fish gave birth to a cow and a monkey kind of. That's no one's saying that, right? It's a gradual descent, but we're closer to that event than the split between lobe-finned fish and ray-finned fish. We're closer to that event. So, genetically, we're more similar to the lobe-finned fish. And the lobe-finned fish, they're not our ancestors, right? We both share the same ancestors. So, he just doesn't understand how evolution works, which amazes me why they talk about them at all, because they don't understand.
Monkey-like creature, and from that you finally get people in modern.
A monkey-like creature. Well, I wouldn't say that. Okay, it probably would have had some traits that modern monkeys have. Sure. But really, we are talking about, and I hesitate to use the term primitive, right? Like, because primitive suggests technology. It's a bad word for it. But basal, we split off from a more basal simian ancestor. But sort of to say monkey-like well, we are monkey-like in certain ways. We have the same type of ears. We have prehensile fingers. So what do you mean by monkey-like? Because we're monkey-like, right? I don't, you know, it's kind of wild. I don't understand. Life did essentially emerge from primordial ooze, not that far argument in layman's terms. Yeah, I don't think that that's much, like, to sort of say emerging from primordial ooze, that's a sort of straw man in and of itself. Because, you know, primordial ooze may not be how life came about in abiogenesis. You know, the fact that they've found some kind of strange biological-ish ooze on asteroid Bennu is really fascinating. Like, they've found some substance which seems to have some properties that may indicate that it's kind of organic. But, you know, I don't think anybody's sort of saying magic wand. And I don't think anyone's sort of saying, I know how life formed. But the fact that we have found not only all 5 base nucleotides for RNA and DNA on asteroid Bennu, as well as, like, I think it's 10 of the 14, or is it 14 to 20? We found so many of the key amino acids on asteroid Bennu, you know, it kind of is a nail in the coffin that abiogenesis is impossible. It may be very possible. It may have happened in space. We don't know. And nobody's saying they know, but is it plausible with the evidence that we've found? Oh, hell yes. If you can form all 5 base nucleotides and you know, so many of the key amino acids without any human invention whatsoever, just happening out there in space, it really does put a nail in the coffin of, oh, well, it's too unlikely to have ever happened naturally. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's actually wild. But no one's saying, hey, it was a primordial ooze. No one's saying, hey, we know it was thermal vents. No one's saying any of this stuff. We still don't know. But we don't know does not mean there has to have been a God that did it. Because the question arises, if you need God to form base nucleotides in DNA, then why did God put it on an asteroid? Like, what's the point? Like, was it just he you know, is this how God saves his work to clipboard or something? Just puts it on an asteroid, lets it sit. If ever he needs it again, he downloads the asteroid. I don't know. But it kind of suggests it can form under natural conditions, and more than that, it can form in space.
Apes. And from there, humanity evolved out of Africa to cover the entire Earth. This is the fairy tale of evolution.
Not a fairy tale. We've got genetic evidence for this. And, you know, again, the you know, talking snake and magic fruit is the one that I would sort of say is the fairy tale. I don't know what evidence you've got for that, but we've got a lot of genetic evidence for, you know, out of Africa. And I'll go through that when I start talking about haplogroups and their unwillingness to actually look at the genetic evidence for haplogroups and their origins.
All of that, which I just said, is believed by a blind faith in spite of all the laws of science. It breaks. Again, I say.
It doesn't break any laws of science. Like, humans coming from Africa, humans evolving, breaks no laws of science. You want to sort of say, oh, but abiogenesis does. Okay. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about evolution. Evolution only deals with life once it has formed and how it diversifies. The theory of evolution, it concerns itself exclusively with biodiversity. Why we have such a diverse amount of animals in different parts, why we see structures that are sort of biological structures that are almost the same, but you know, significantly different in certain ways. Like, for instance, you may get insects developing wings and birds developing wings, right? They achieve similar things, they are similar structures, but they're completely different in certain ways. Why that occurs, right? Like, so biodiversity and sort of, what's it called? Convergent evolution is really what it deals with, which isn't explained by the Christian young earth model, except for God works in mysterious ways. Like, why did God decide to go with two completely different solutions that converge on the same kind of structure to overcome the same problem? Why didn't he just reuse the same structure? Oh, God works in mysterious ways. Well, evolution explains it, because it can only work with the structures that it already has. But unfortunately, religion doesn't explain that. All it says is that it's mysterious. You can't question why God does what he does. There's no explanation.
Fairy tale. But as this view, really this fairy tale, became more accepted, all of a sudden, biblical history and the Tower of Babel came under attack. The account of scripture where everybody was originally together at Babel.
Well, it didn't just... So the theory of evolution wasn't just... they put it out there, they convinced people, they pushed for it, they did all of this stuff, and, that isn't really what happened. Okay, Darwin presented this to the scientific community. I believe in England, the College of, I think it was the College of Natural Sciences, presented to which institution? I forget the name of the institution, but he presented it, and like, it wasn't believed. Linnean Society of London is the original presentation, right? And it was put into the Journal of Proceedings of the Linnean Society. So he presented this to the scientific community as a naturalist, as a biologist. He presented it to the scientific community, and it wasn't like, he went out to the people on the street and just pushed it and said, oh, here's my new theory. You've got to all tell the scientists to accept this, which is what this guy's doing and Answers in Genesis are doing. What they're doing is they're going to ordinary people out there on the world saying, hey, we've got to push this. We've got to make this happen. That isn't what Darwin did. He presented it to the scientific community and presented his evidence for it. And it got a lot of pushback. It was fought against vigorously. It was really, really contentious. But as the evidence grew over the years, more and more scientists accepted it because the scientific evidence pointed in that direction. Darwin made predictions. He predicted that we would find a bird with unfused wing fingers. That because birds had come from reptiles originally, and theropods, that we will find a bird with teeth and unfused wing fingers. And then a year after he made that prediction, they actually found the fossil of exactly what he predicted, because he was right. And this scientific and people have challenged evolution strenuously, as they should. Scientists don't just sit there and go, well, that's the accepted science, we just accept it. No, they test it. They test every facet. And as I've said, evolution is the single most tested theory in the history of humanity. And it's survived every single test. And is a lot more complicated than Darwin ever could have imagined. Darwin didn't know about all kinds of things. At the moment, we're beginning to really understand how horizontal gene transfer can work in multicellular organisms, i.e. like a virus infecting one person, then that virus taking on part of the DNA of the person and the virus being transmitted to somebody else and then writing the DNA into somebody else. Like, this is absolutely fascinating, kind of scary, and I don't think anybody in Darwin's time could have envisaged that could even be a thing. But it's a thing. It's actually a thing, and it's just insane. It's insane. But we have studies on this. We know that retroviruses are a thing. They write DNA onto our cells. We're beginning to understand just how connected everything is to one another, and how no organism is in an island. No organism is just this series of DNA. We're beginning to understand how the symbiosis with other organisms produced some of our cells. Like, for instance, the mitochondria was probably another cell swallowed by another one and was turned into an organelle, a part of the cell that couldn't digest it. We saw this happening with nitroplasts, right? So a cell swallowed a nitrogen producing, another cell which produced nitrogen, couldn't digest it, and it incorporated it into its biology. It then became a part of that original cell, an organelle, and passed down DNA and replicate. Like, this happens, and it's wild, but it's true. What can you say? The truth is the truth. Hey, Maya.
Then scattered by God, was by and large rejected in favor of evolution. You see, the story of evolution isn't based on eyewitness accounts. It's built on assumptions, and it directly...
Why should we build something on eyewitness accounts? Like, why should we do that? Like, I don't understand. Like, why should we go, okay, well, Bigfoot obviously exists because there's eyewitness accounts. Like, why would we do that? And when you say it's built on assumptions, so this is sort of that really, those weasel words. No offense, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, but these are weasel words, because when you say built on assumptions, well, yeah, putting forth a hypothesis is part of the scientific process, but it's not just left as, oh, well, I'm going to postulate this and then walk away. That isn't what's happening. It is, well, if this is true, here's how we falsify it. Here's how we test it. And if it's true, it should pass. And that's what's happened. Like, saying that evolution is built on assumptions is the same as saying, well, germ theory is built on assumptions. We kind of made the hypothesis that there were transmission vectors for germs, and they were tiny organisms that we couldn't see that are transmitted. And we just assumed that and then tested it, and it found out that that's the case. Yeah, same with evolution. So this isn't just based upon wild assumptions. The initial hypothesis is like, let's assume this is true, right? And then you come up with a way to show that if this happens, it's not true, right? Let's assume it is, test it as if it was true, and if it fails, you dump it. It's gotten rid of, right? That's how you test a hypothesis. But it doesn't mean the entire evolution is based upon a hypothesis. That's just the starting stage. Then comes testing, peer review, retest it. What the hell, guy?
contradicts the word of God. You see, Darwin claimed humans evolved from apes in Africa because, well, that's where we find apes today.
What? No, that's not... No. In each great region of the world, the living mammals are closely related to the extinct species of the same region. It is therefore probable that Africa was formerly inhabited by extinct apes closely allied to the gorilla and chimpanzee. And as these two species are now man's nearest allies, it is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived on the African continent and elsewhere. Yeah, correct. Yeah, probable. He didn't say, yes, we know because that's where apes are. He's saying it is probable that we came from Africa because our nearest relatives are chimpanzees and gorillas. So it is probable that if we split from chimpanzees and gorillas in the past, then it's most probable that that originally happened in Africa because that's where our nearest relatives are. Right? It's like saying if you're talking to somebody and they say, oh yeah, I've got a ton of family in Oregon, right? I don't even know if I pronounced that right. Is it Oregon? Oregon, I don't know. Anyway, they're in a state. All of my family's there. My cousins are there. You would probably go, oh, so you came from Oregon. That's a good guess, right? They're not saying absolutely. Maybe part of your family moved away. But if you said all of your relatives or the closest relatives that you have live in that state, a good guess is that you came from that state. But what he's leaving out is how we've confirmed that with DNA evidence and genetics. That's what he's leaving out. Because of course he does. He just has to attack Darwin and say, hey, Darwin made a pretty good guess, and that's all that we're basing it on. Absolutely not.
Well, the Bible tells a very different and true.
Okay, so, I mean, this is Wikipedia. Keep that in mind. It's not, this would not be used as a reliable citation, but I can at least use it to explain to you how haplogroups work. So these are based upon the Y chromosome. Now, why not mitochondrial DNA, right? Like, so you've got two real ways to trace ancestry. Okay, you've got Y chromosome, which is the male line, and you've got mitochondrial DNA, which is the female line, because the genetics for mitochondria is in the X that's passed along, right? So it basically, the reason why I'm pointing to Y chromosome is because over long periods, right, like really long periods, mitochondrial DNA is better, right? Like, it's much better because the Y chromosome is it's very unstable, if that's sort of the word. It changes a lot. It's very prone to mutation just by its very nature, right? So even though it, like, because it only, like, you won't get two Y chromosomes coming from your parents, right? You'll only have two X, which of course generally speaking makes you female, although biology is a lot more complicated than that. The Y, it basically only comes, so there's no recombination, there's no merging of that with anything else. So the Y chromosome, while stable as far as recombination with the parents, combined with the parents, that's rather stable, but it's still prone to mutation, which means that it will have a high mutation rate. So that means that because of the stability of the mitochondrial DNA, the mitochondria is a good way to trace it over long time periods, right? But if you want to know who's related to who and get down to the nitty-gritty of how humans split apart, you want to go for more short-term changes. And because the Y chromosome is prone to mutations, you can really get down to how humanity split apart. So keep in mind, there is mitochondrial DNA as well. It does suggest the same thing, that humans came from Africa, but I want to get into haplogroups, which is much better demonstrated by DNA that changes a lot more frequently, because we can really start to split them up if the changes are more frequent. Okay, just, this isn't a, hey, patriarchy, let's trace it through the male. There's definitely a reason why they sort of, when you're referring to haplogroups, you go to the male one. It's because you can track changes easier, if that makes sense. So what we have here, so these are the haplogroups that have come out. So we've got sort of those ones, the A, B, and C. So what you'll find is that the less diversified, the more of these haplogroups it'll have in it, right? So the more diversified is the further from the origin they are, the further from that initial population they are. And the population with the less diversification is sub-Saharan Africa. It is the people in sub-Saharan Africa, right, which is haplogroup CT, right, this CT group that then diversified throughout. But you know, there are people with just these initial haplogroups in them, right, and D0. So from there, we have the diverse, and we can tell that, say, haplogroup H was not directly connected to the African haplogroup. It wasn't, right? We know that they have elements from the CT haplogroup in it. And as Europeans, we would be out in K somewhere. I don't know if you're European, maybe you are, but don't forget, this is exactly how, like, Ancestry.com or what is it, 23andMe or whatever, is tracing where you're from, right? They will look at these haplogroups and say, you are this percentage, sub-Saharan Africa, this percentage, Central Asia, this percentage. This is how we trace ancestry, through all of those genetic programs, right, that charge amazing amounts of money to take your DNA and then tell you that, hey, you're actually part Jamaican or something. I'm really just making, an instance up, but you get what I mean. This is what they do, and this is how they do it, right? So we have these haplogroups that are spread out, and we can tell that it originated in Africa, which is what Darwin guessed, but he was right. But notice how it said probably when Darwin was talking. He didn't know for sure. We now know for sure. Okay, the genetics don't lie. That is where we trace these groups to. But we'll get to something absolutely hilarious. So stay with, what was this dude's name? Brian or whatever? Because we get to some hilarious stuff.
According to Scripture, all people today came from Noah's family after the flood. Going back to the beginning, God created all things in 6 days and made man in his image, which is not a problem for an all-powerful God. Thus, every human history can trace their family tree back to one man, one woman, Adam and Eve. And that means, dear friends, there is just one race, the human race.
Yeah, and sort of evolution says that as well. It does sort of say, evolution does say that all life is one life. All life is connected. It's not just humans, but also everything is connected. But when we're talking about, race, it's more a social construct than anything else. There is more genetic variation within a race than there is between races, right? Like, so this is how we know that race is just a made-up thing, because genetically, and according to evolution, there has been no speciation between these populations. We're not a different species. We're barely different races. In fact, the variation between them is larger than the variation outside of them. So on average, there's more variation between me and another person who has a European background than there is on the average DNA between me and someone from Africa. There's nothing to it. And evolution says that. So just sort of saying, well, evolution says that we're all different and we're all different people and stuff. No, that's not what evolution says at all. And evolution went a long way to show that, hey, we are one species. There is no real genetic difference between us at all.
Are we different? Yes, to the glory of God, but still just one race. And then about 1,600 years after creation, there was a global flood that wrecked this world, laying down most of the rock layers and fossils we see today. And those rock layers and fossils scream a rapid recent formation.
No, they do not scream anything of the sort. In fact, those fossils are in ordered layers where you do have more basal, more I'm not going to say primitive, more basal organisms towards the bottom. So the Precambrian rabbit was a challenge that went out to the young Earth creationists, right? Like, just find a rabbit above the Precambrian level. Oh, sorry, below the Precambrian level. What am I saying? Below the Precambrian level. You won't find it because mammals hadn't evolved. The creationists have to do some sort of magic sorting of these fossils by the floods to put them in the order that they are, and still come out with 6,000 years. Birds don't appear until a certain point. Why is that? Well, there doesn't seem to be an answer for that. It's just, oh, that's how the flood did it. Or in the case of some people, not mentioning any names, they'll say birds were flying, so they were the last to drown. Okay, then explain why pteranodons are beneath there, in with the dinosaurs, because they fly as well? Why are insects who also fly down there whatsoever? But that's the excuse they've given. I don't know how you're supposed to explain the sorting of fossils into these distinct evolutions of prokaryotes, eukaryotes, simple snails and shellfish, and that's all you find on some layers, going up to all you find is fish and the previous sort of more advanced versions or more developed versions of the previous ones, up and up and up, it all falls into place. Apparently the floodwaters do organism sorting, apparently, for reasons that I cannot fathom, no pun intended.
Not long, slow, gradual processes over millions of years. And then as people got off the ark, God told Noah's descendants to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. But instead of obeying...
Yeah, but I have severe doubts that 8-person off the boat could fill the earth to the point where they could make a tower in a city in 100 years. I have my doubts. I really do. Like, even if they had 1,000 years, they'd still be struggling. 8 people to make the at least hundreds of thousands needed to build the greatest city the world had ever known. Yeah, I've got some problems with that.
They said, no, let's build a city, and it's our to make a name for ourselves, so that we're not scattered. They openly defied God. They wanted the focus to be on them and not God. But Genesis 11 tells us, God came down and confused our language. Imagine that one day you are talking with your neighbor, and you can understand them, you're joking about whatever, and then the next day you can't understand a word coming out of his mouth. It'll be utter chaos. And that's what happened. And God then scattered the people.
Is that what happened? Do you have any evidence of that whatsoever? Any evidence of that? Because at the moment you mentioned that there were some cities that weren't completed, okay? But that does not get to whether or not the entire world had one language, and whether overnight, as you claim, all their languages changed. It does not address that. To me, it sounds like mythology of why do those people over there speak a different language than us? Why are they, why don't we understand them and understand us? Now, when you look at linguistics, they have an answer for it. It's because populations that have been isolated develop, you could say evolve over time, different dialects. Those dialects turn into different languages, right? They will develop their own words. Those words will turn into vastly different dialects, and those dialects will turn into different languages. If, for instance, Australia's just cut off, right? Australia uses some weird words. Like I'm aware of that. We're quirky. We use we say Macca's instead of McDonald's, right? That if you're in Australia and you say, "Hey, I'm going to Macca's," they will understand exactly what you mean. If you say in Australia, "Oh, I got to go to the servo today," right? You may not know what a servo is. It is short for service station, which is a what do you call it? A gas station, right? But you say that in Australia, 100% of the population will know what you mean. Besides maybe immigrants and stuff, of course. But people that speak English in Australia will know exactly what you mean. Whereas that is completely meaningless to someone outside of Australia. Servo. Or maybe it's not, but you get what I'm saying. If we were isolated, that would become the standard nomenclature for a gas station, right? Where you go to fill up on gas for your car. Over time, that would become the actual word. Over time, it would be a different language. If we were separated from the US, I mean, one can only hope, but if we're separated from the... I'm joking, okay? Don't get mad at me, okay? It's a joke. It's a joke, okay? Okay, I know you're from the US. You probably love the US. It's a joke, okay? But if we were completely separated, that differences in language would start to form a completely different language. It would evolve. And we know this happened with Latin. We know that Latin evolved into Spanish, into Italian, and into French. the Romantic languages. We know that happened. Right, petrol. Yeah, we call it petrol, right? But I think even the English don't call it a service station. I think they call it a petrol station. So, you know, we've got a different dialect, of course, than English speakers in England or English speakers in America. And that's just how language works. That's just how language develops over time. But if you're sort of in the past and you're looking to explain why, you know, those Assyrians over there don't seem to speak the same language as you, you know, people make stuff up. Now, there could have been a city. There could have been a city where people met up and maybe they had a trading language or some sort of trading dialect that they used to trade, and maybe that city was never completed, and maybe this story arose. We don't know. But just sort of saying, hey, this happened because the Bible says it did. No. We need better evidence than that, because that is not how language works.
People abroad the face of the earth. This is God's eyewitness testimony, and there is no greater authority than God and his word.
Well, it's not God's eyewitness testimony because God didn't write it. Humans wrote this. Like, you've got to... This is sort of the fallacy of begging the question, right? Which is sort of saying... begging the question is sort of assuming something is true without ever demonstrating it. So when you sort of say, oh, but God wrote the Bible. Do you know that for sure? How do you know that? How do you know that? That seems weird, right? How do you know that is the case? And then they go to it's inspired by God. How do you know that? It doesn't seem to be something that we have any kind of evidence for. They just take it on faith, and that isn't giving an explanation of how you know it. That's sort of explaining that you don't have to have an explanation, which is weird to me, but hey.
Hebrews 6:13 says that when God made a promise to Abraham, he swore by who? Himself, because there's no greater authority than God. So when it comes to the question...
Okay, but did he write that? Because if God didn't write that, then God didn't swear by himself, right? That means that someone wrote down that God says he swears by himself. That means someone wrote that down. Haven Raid? Oh, thank you, Jedi. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. I'll wait for the thing to pop up. I should have the pop-up. Maybe it just hasn't popped up yet. Maybe YouTube hates me. Maybe... Oh, Skeptic Haven, welcome. I hope you find my channel a haven as well. You're very welcome. Good to see you. Not ad hoc but forced. If a contingent thing needs a reason, then terminus cannot be contingent or physical. Why can't it be physical? I'm not sure why it can't be physical. PSR drives that, not convenience. Well, I mean, I'm not that great big a fan of PSR. I think that it is possible to have events that are acausal, right? Like if we look at, and I'm not saying that, hey, there can be acausal events. I'm saying I don't know if things can be acausal or things must have a cause. When we look at, say, radioactive decay, right? Which particles decay at any one time seems to be acausal, right? Like we can't seem to determine why one decays and one doesn't. We can't seem to find any reason for it, right? Like it just does it at an incredibly reliable rate. You know, there's speculations, but we haven't found one. But does that mean that there's no cause, or does that mean we haven't found one? Well, we don't know. So sort of saying things must have a cause, I don't think you can say that. That's kind of a black swan fallacy, right? Black swans can't exist. Why? You've never seen a black swan. Well, things can't be acausal. Why? You've never seen an acausal thing. Well, all we can say is that it seems to be that everything needs a cause from what we've seen so far. But that doesn't explain radioactive decay, and that's seeming to be completely uncaused. Does that mean we haven't found a cause yet? Yeah, possibly. Possibly. No, myth talk. No. If you sort of say it's a myth, there is a sufficient reason for that story being told. There is a reason why that has been relayed, and it's the same reason why somebody catches a fish and it becomes larger over time. Legend building is a reason. Like, you're misunderstanding the principle of sufficient reason. It sort of says that any event needs sufficient cause in order for that event to happen, right? Like, there needs to be something to cause it, right? It's not talking about abstractions. Like, that's like saying, well, what's the cause of me coming up with a flumbus, right? Like a made-up thing. You don't need a principle of sufficient reason for abstractions. They're abstractions. Like, so you're misunderstanding. If it's a myth, someone told a story. It could be because they were looking for an explanation and were not happy with current explanations. It could be that they were trying to build up the status of their house. It could be because they had a dream and thought the dream was true. It could be any number of reasons. But we don't say, hey, there must be a clearly defined reason for somebody to present an abstraction to the world. Right? I don't know why you would need that. That's weird. That's just weird. Sorry, liberal destroyer, that's just strange.
People evolved out of Africa, where we scattered from Babel after the flood. We go with the eyewitness, God. Friends, Darwin wasn't there.
Yeah, of course Darwin wasn't there, but why would Darwin have to be there? This is the were you there kind of evidence. It's like sort of saying, hey, the sun rose in South Africa yesterday. Were you there? Well, no, but we have the evidence of how the sun works scientifically. It works all around the world. And even though I've not talked to somebody in South Africa today, I know that the sun rose there because I understand the science of it. Oh, thank you so much for the raid, Captive Desk. That is awesome. Thank you, Dave, if you are here on a raid. Who else said there was a raid? There was a Skeptic Haven people, which are always... Oh, time travelers. Okay, well, we're going back in time to the year 2000 and stupid. Okay, that's where we're going back to. So prep yourselves, because we're going back to the hearty days of 2000 and stupid, where Answers in Genesis are making the worst arguments. So the story of evolution and the theory of evolution isn't based upon, hey, we had somebody there and we saw the apes turn into human. That isn't what we're saying. We're saying that the genetic evidence, the fossil evidence, the scientific evidence all points to this one answer. And the theory of evolution isn't complete. Like I said, this whole thing of endosymbiosis, right? Capturing other organisms and integrating them into biology. We didn't have a clue about that, 20 years ago? It just wasn't even on the radar. It is way more complicated than I ever thought. Like, it is so complicated. But we're not just going to go, well, somebody says a thing. That's evidence enough. Somebody saw something, that's evidence. A book says something, that's not how we do things scientifically. Calling the myth assumes it's false. Yeah, I mean, I call it a myth, but I don't call it a myth for no reason. No. I don't call it a myth for no reason. As I pointed out, the whole idea that there was a global flood goes against many scientific principles, and it is a story from antiquity told that has supernatural elements and seems to violate science. Okay, that is the story. Okay, it is the story of the flood. It violates all of geology. It violates all of biology, and that the story that 8 people 100 years later were numerous enough to create the greatest city known to man I'm really sorry, but that is the kind of fantastical element that leads us to call something a myth. It's not just sort of saying, hey, it's a myth because I'm assuming it's false. It is looking at that story, evaluating it just like any other myth, right? And sort of saying this does not align with what we know about the world. Okay, so this isn't just a begging the question, I'm just going to assume it's a myth. It's like we can look at, say, the Iliad, right? Which is the war in Troy. You know, Homer wrote this sort of series of poetry outlining sort of the gods doing this, and, you know, a man called Achilles who was immune to any kind of wound except on his ankle. You know, these fantastical elements. It isn't just me begging the question saying, oh, that's a myth. No, it's looking at that story and going, it has these fantastical elements which do not align with our scientific understanding. Now, what I will say is that doesn't mean that everything is false, right? It doesn't mean that there wasn't a city that wasn't finished. It doesn't mean that there wasn't any of these things happening, that nothing at all in the Bible is true. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying the Bible is complete myth, but there are mythological elements that need better evidence than just it's in the book in order to show that it in fact happened. Okay, that is basically what we need to categorize a text out of antiquity with fantastical elements as more than myth. Sorry, that's just how it works. The onus is on you, not me. I didn't stipulate the terminus, I derived it. Contingent needs a reason, the reason can't be contingent. A made-up word skips the argument. What? No, like, so, yeah, contingent things need something, but if something's necessary, it doesn't need anything. If the universe is necessary, then it doesn't need a cause, and that's sort of part of the reason why I had. Like, if you've got a principle of sufficient reason, what's the sufficient reason for God? If everything needs a cause. This is why most apologists, Destroyer, this is why most apologists stick to necessary, like things that begin need a cause. Because if it's necessary, i.e. it's got no cause, it doesn't need a cause. There's necessary and contingent. Contingent things need a cause, necessary ones don't. If the universe is necessary, then it doesn't need a cause.
And here's the thing. Darwin's evolutionary view didn't just reject biblical history, undermining biblical authority.
Yeah, so the Bible is not history. I mean, partly it does have some historical things in it, you know, like, don't get me wrong. There is some important historical and anthropological information, but it's not a history textbook. It's not a history book, okay? It is not. Is it a religious text? It's not a history book. It wasn't written down to record events as they actually happened by a historian. It was put there to record the spiritual journeys of those who it's writing about. There's a big difference between that.
It also introduced very dangerous ideas about the so-called races. You see, he claimed there were higher and lower races, even suggesting some could be exterminated in his book, The Descent of Man.
No. The universe isn't necessarily parts. Okay, it isn't necessarily parts. That's not the case. It's sum of contingent. Okay, so what you're doing is making a composition division fallacy there, right? You're sort of saying, hey, because the parts have this property, the whole of it has this property as well. And that's a mistake. That's called a composition. Well, it's a composition fallacy. Right, it's saying that because the parts have a certain thing, the composition has that same attribute, and that's not the case.
And just take a guess. Who do you think Darwin thought were the higher, more civilized races? If you said the Caucasians, you're right, because they looked like him. Now, this doesn't mean that evolution is the cause of racism. Racism was around long before evolution because racism is caused by sin. What evolution did do, it threw gas on the fire of racism. It gave some people in their minds a so-called scientific justification for their racism. And you see this with...
Well, no, it doesn't. Because when you understand evolution properly, it isn't just that you're species is the same species and that race is merely a construct. It's really something that we see minor changes and basically bundle them into one another with no real understanding of, hey, that isn't, the variation within that race is higher than the variation from the average outside of it, right? So the average person in it, they will be more different than the other person inside that race than an average phenotype, average genotype, right? The average gene will be outside of it, right? So there's more variation from the norm inside a race than there is variation between the races. So we understand this. And so Darwin, when he talked about races, he wasn't talking about human races, right? That's not what he was talking about. He was using race to say species. And he was sort of saying man is all one species. It's been said from the start.
Darwin, with Karl Marx, Margaret Sanger, and Hitler, and many others.
Yeah, so all of these people kind of did not understand evolution properly and probably misused it, probably. The whole idea of, say, Aryan superiority, for instance, if you get the mustached gentleman on the right there. Okay, so for a start, the Aryan race is not a thing. Okay, Aryan is a language group. Okay, that's how stupid that was. He basically got a language group of the sort of Scandinavian languages like Finnish, Norwegian, Swedish, and that was a language group, and said, oh, that's a race. Number one, dumb idea. Number two is the idea that you have pure blood. You keep reinforcing that collection of people. Completely wrong. Okay? If you restrict your genetic pool, right? Your genetic pool, it's going to be more harmful than if you diversify it across races. Okay, it's actually if you have a child with somebody that's vastly different genetically than you, it actually is better than someone that is very genetically similar. Refer to the Habsburg chin, when all of the nobles in Europe interbred among themselves and they ended up terribly, okay, with haemophilia and other genetic conditions, because genetic diversity is a good thing, and we absolutely need to keep genetic diversity, right? No, there's no problem with it. In fact, it's beneficial. Understand this, but somebody didn't. A lot of these people didn't, right? Because we didn't understand the theory completely at this point. Darwin didn't understand the theory completely. So you're sort of pointing at Darwin saying, hey, the theory is the same as what Darwin said. No. We don't do Darwinism. We're now up to integrated synthesis. And I know that's a couple of big words, but basically it just means that there are so many mechanisms of evolution that it's not just natural descent. It's not just natural selection. There is genetic drift. There is endosymbiosis. There is horizontal gene transfer. There is there's all these mechanisms that Darwin didn't even know about. Darwin didn't know about genetics at all. That's before his time. But I will say Darwin was a genius for not knowing about genetics, not knowing about any of this other stuff, and putting it together. Just making that mental leap to say, how could this be explained? Proposing a hypothesis and managing to test it. And since then, it has had the shit tested out of it. It is the most tested theory in the history of humanity, and it's passed. It's never been falsified, ever. And it's so easy to do. Precambrian rabbit. That's it. That'll falsify it. But that never happens.
But when we start with Scripture, the Word of God, there's no such thing as multiple races. We're all just one race, the human race. We all go back to Adam and Eve, and then we come through the line of Noah. We're just one big human family. That's why the gospel is for all nations, not some, all.
And I will point out that sort of earlier Christians did use the curse of Ham to be incredibly racist. I will point that out. That because Noah cursed Ham to be slaves of his brothers, Christians used that as an excuse to do horrendous things to black people. And some Christian denominations said that the black skin was a product of the curse of Ham. Like, so this is it. He's calling evolution a fairy tale when in the past, instead of believing in evolution, which says, hey, if you're in a place with a lot of sun, the people with high melanin able to block the sun are probably going to be the ones to survive. And therefore, evolution will tend towards populations with darker skin. Pretty simple, right? Instead, Christians have said, I don't know if this is him. I do apologize. I don't know if it's him, but Christians have said in the past that, hey, the dark skin is because he was cursed by Noah. So what's the fairy tale here? Like, are you serious? I mean, on one hand, we've got a demonstrated, scientifically tested, and something that even Christians now accept, that, hey, if you put humans in a sunny place, you will get dark-skinned humans over time. No one disputes that. That's not a fairy tale. Or it was a curse of God. Yeah, I wonder which is true. I wonder which is the fairy tale.
That's why Jesus died for everyone, because we are all related. Now, as we look at the Tower of Babel, the first thing to note is that Genesis 10 does not contradict Genesis 11. Some will claim that. But no, what's actually happening is Genesis 10 is a summary of the nations and their different languages. And the Genesis 11 goes back and tells you how we get these different nations. So some people read that and say, okay, well, Genesis 10, there are a bunch of different nations and they have different languages. And then Genesis 11, it says, now there was one language. Is that a contradiction? No. Again, chapter 10 is a summary. Chapter 11 goes back and tells you how we get to Genesis chapter 10. Kind of like reading a newspaper.
Yeah, I didn't read that. I've been through it recently, but I think chapter 10, and let me just look this up. I think chapter 10 is just giving the lineages. It's a really boring passage kind of thing. It just sort of, look, it's significant for the people at the time. I totally get it, but coming down to it, I think it just gives the ancestry of everybody. So hang on a second. Yeah, so this is Genesis 10. It sort of says, this is the account of Jen, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. So yeah, of course this isn't, when it says the sons of Japheth and then Gomer, his eldest, and then he has sons, of course it's not going into before, like it's going after the Tower of Babel kind of thing, right? And just going through the lineages. So yeah, I don't think anybody thinks that this is, oh, well, they all spoke the same language afterward, or they spoke different languages before the Tower. I don't think anybody thinks that. I don't know who's making that argument. Now, the whole world had one language and common speech. I don't see the... I think he's arguing against something that has not been argued for. Well, it says these are the sons of Ham by their clans and their languages in territories and nations. Yeah, I don't know which person or which sort of people were in the Tower of Babel. It doesn't really say. So I think they are sort of simultaneous accounts. One's doing the lineage, one's doing the city. I don't know anyone that's arguing against that. It's very strange. I think it's more just a, hey, this is what would be a good argument and I'm arguing against it. I don't think it's a good argument. Because if you've got a lineage of 5 levels of descendants, and then you're saying, or 5 or 6 or however many it has in there, I don't know how that would fit into 100 years. I don't know.
paper or an article online, that might give you a summary at the beginning of the whole article, and then when you start the real article, it goes back in time to tell you where all this occurred.
What is this article he's talking about? Hold on, I think I missed something.
It goes back and tells you how we get to Genesis chapter 10. Kind of like reading a newspaper or an article online, that might give you a
Editor fired for publishing scientific paper skeptical of climate change. Yeah, I don't trust Ken Ham on this one. I got to be honest with you. I don't think editors are generally fired for that kind of thing. Generally, they're fired for sort of making statements that aren't backed up by any scientific evidence, as far as I know. Look, and some journals are less skeptical and less scientific than others. Some are not really reliable at all. I sort of, you know, I find that hard to believe, but I'm not sure why, and you know, hear me out on this one. I'm not sure why the American Journal of Economics and Sociology would be publishing a paper on climate change. Why would that be? I wouldn't imagine if they're sort of a scientific paper on economics and sociology would be doing a paper on climate change. So that's always when you know something's dodgy is going on. It's when, you know, this is one of the things that will tip you off. When a paper is published in a journal completely unrelated to the subject, right? Right. So was it because he published something that was scientific in nature, like sort of meteorological in nature, as somebody working in financial circles? Yeah, maybe. I really would like to find this, because I distrust Ken Ham. I really do. I really don't believe Ken Ham. American Journal of Economics and Sociology published a special edition that attempted to cover different views. Dr. Marty Rowland Lau, Marcel Crock, and Andy May's article, "Carbon dioxide and a warming climate are not problems to be published in this special edition." Yeah, okay, that's outside of your field, sir. That I can imagine. But it's not for publishing, you know, publishing the opposition. It's for publishing something so far out of your field that you can't see the field. Really, the climate change movement is an anti-God religious movement. What? No! Ken Ham, what are you doing? No! Oh, okay. No, I see why this happened. I've seen why this happened. Heavily, according to Burnett, yeah, they've got all these people commenting on it. I'd like to know the paper's opinion on it. Wow. I just don't know why. I don't know why that, you know, a economic and sociology journal would be publishing a paper on problems with climate warming and carbon dioxide. Like, I don't understand. That seems dodgy. That seems dodgy. It seems to have gotten from a college paper. American Journal of Economics and Sociology. Look, I totally would understand if they're publishing a sociology about how sort of the climate change movement has affected populations, or, you know, things like that. But I don't understand how that journal would in any way be represented by, you know, the meteorology. Like, it just, wow. Marcel Crockett challenging the climate consensus. Yeah, no, look, I don't know whether this is a problem with that editor. I don't know why, I don't know if it's the reason, but I can say what is very, very worrying is that got published at all when it doesn't seem to be about economics or sociology. I really don't know, but I can kind of imagine that it's a problem. Because if they were going to do that, if they were going to comment on the science of it, not that sociology and economics isn't a science, it's just, if they're talking about the meteorological science, they should have published it in that paper, not gone through another paper that kind of, they can slip it into. This seems really dodgy, really, really, really dodgy.
Summary at the beginning of the whole article, and then when you start the real article, it goes back in time to tell you where all this occurred and how it took place. Same thing here. So Genesis 11 is expounding how we get Genesis 10. Keep that in mind. Think about those genealogies, those family trees that you see in Genesis 5 and 11.
Oh, yeah. No, evolution's the fairy tale, but guys living 900 years? No, total fact, yeah. That's not fairy tale at all. Yeah, that happens every day. Yeah. Wow.
So-and-so begat so-and-so begat.
Talking snakes, talking donkeys? No, that's the real story, not these fairy tales.
So-and-so. Those things you love to read at night if you're trying to go to sleep. Rather just knock you out. But in those genealogies, those family trees, we can trace the lines of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We see their descendants, and then their descendants, and how it's split apart as a result of what happened in Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9.
Yeah, and that conflicts completely with the DNA evidence and haplogroups that we have that show that it did not come from 8 people. Look, 8 people is such a bottleneck. There is no possible way the DNA would not show that. There is no possible scenario where we would not be able... We saw a bottleneck of, I think it was about 1,500 members of humanity. And we almost got wiped out. There was almost not enough genetic information to continue. 8 people? I'm sorry, that just can't happen.
And as we look at the names of those genealogies, we can get excited about this because we can see that these people groups came from these people groups, and we can actually look and see maybe our ancestors are right there. So Genesis 10 and 11 aren't just boring family trees. They're your history. They're my history. They're a roadmap to the nations.
Yeah, I accept that they're wrong. Like, we can trace the DNA. It did not come from Central Middle East. No, did not come from the Levant. No. Or rather, what I should say is there are more basal haplogroups than the one that you're talking about.
Japheth's descendants went on to become many of the European nations, some in North Asia and the Middle East. Shem's line gave rise to a lot of the Middle East and Far Eastern nations like parts of India and the Hebrew people. Ham's descendants settled as far as China as well as Africa, some down to the Malay Peninsula, extending down to Melanesia. But that might be a little broad. Some might ask for more specifics, like where do certain people groups come from? For example, what about the Irish, the Chinese, the Egyptians, and so forth? Where do they come from?
Yeah, and it kind of really worries me when they start talking about, well, these races are the descendants of Ham, just because of what the Old Testament says, right? And I'll sort of share it with you. So this always worries me, right? It always worries me when they're sort of, all of this race is descended from Ham, right? Or Japheth, or this person or that person, because it gets problematic, right? It gets really problematic. Yeah, so cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves he will be to his brothers. So this is Ham, right? The descendants are Canaan. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be the slave to Japheth. And that is the curse of Ham. Because Ham didn't cover up his father when he saw him naked. Yes, apparently slavery is due to some dude ages ago not covering his father. That is why. just ridiculous. So when he starts to talk about, oh, all of the Asia are the descendants of of Ham, it makes me worry, because in the past, a very close follower of that is, oh, the descendants of Ham shall be, the slaves of Japheth, and Japheth being the European nations, right? Like
The Middle East and the Far Eastern nations, like parts of India
right? Like,
and the Hebrew people. Ham's descendants settled as far as China as well as Africa, some down to Malay
yeah, so China, Africa, Malay, and Ham is supposed to be slaves to Japheth. It's a problem.
Peninsula, extending down to Melanesia. But that might be a little broad. Some might ask for more specifics, like where do certain people groups come from? For example, what about the Irish, the Chinese, the Egyptians, and so forth? Where did they come from? Well, let's first consider the origins of the tower. Where is Babel now? Where did all this take place? It would be in modern-day Iraq, somewhere around that area. And the Bible calls it Iraq. It was one of the early cities, and that's where the name Iraq actually comes from. Babel was near Babylon. And some archaeologists
Yeah, Babel was near Babylon, sure. That doesn't mean that everything else is true. That's sort of what I'm talking about with the black and white fallacy, that either it's all true or none of it's true. No, that's not how legends generally work. Generally, you will have an event that happened that has something happened, and then legends build around it, which becomes mythology. It's not an all or nothing case.
like Dr. Clifford Wilson believe the ruins under modern Babylon could be the foundation of the original Tower of Babel. The tower itself probably looked like a ziggurat. The Hebrew word for tower is migdal, and implies a pyramidal shape like a stepped ziggurat. In fact, over 30 ziggurats have been discovered in Mesopotamia alone, many bearing names like Tower to Heaven and Earth. So please note, when the Tower of Babel was built, it wasn't about reaching into space per se, but asserting human pride. We'll make
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're over 100 years, if you are getting 8 people, they would not have the population to build a small ziggurat, much less the largest one in the history of humans, right? Like, it's just a matter of population. Like, you need thousands of people to be able to build this and to, support the workers. It's not just that there's enough people to build it. Those people building it, they need food, they need water, they need supplies, they need to have, donkeys and wranglers and, everything that they need. They also need the materials. You need people to be able to get the material stuff. You can't just have 8 people in 100 years breed up to the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that you're talking about. It's impossible. It's not possible.
a name for ourselves. We would glorify ourselves. When did all this occur with Babel? Well, obviously after the flood, because it's Noah's descendants who did all this, but it was before the call of Abraham. Abraham was not at the Tower of Babel. And so we put the flood roughly 4,350 years ago, and the Tower of Babel roughly 100 years after that. Now that we know a little more about the tower and when Babel took place, here are some well-known people groups and their biblical roots. The Irish and Scots trace back to Magog, son of Japheth. The Irish line goes from Magog to Bath, eventually to Farsi, eventually to Milo. The Scots differ a bit. They go from Magog to Bath to Farsi, eventually to...
Yeah, this is just fan fiction. The haplogroups that we do have, and this is sort of the scientifically evaluated DNA groups, this is, and I think I've got a picture, yeah, this is the sort of movement which is sort of the current theory of where everybody came from, essentially. Sorry, I am not showing that very well. Sorry, that's my bad. But these are the sort of groups, and it starts with haplogroup A, and that's our Y DNA atom in sub-Saharan Africa here. Now, keep in mind, insanely messy, right? Yeah, it's insanely messy. Okay, this is how human groups have migrated. They've migrated out of Africa, then groups came back into Africa, but we can track that with the Y chromosome because it will have all of the mutations that have happened previously, so we know what haplogroup they were part of. Keep in mind, haplogroup A isn't even around anymore. It's haplogroup CT that moved up into the Middle East, and from there they migrated into Western Europe. Okay, and this is not in the space of, a couple of, this person had a son, this person had a son, this person had a son, and then they're in Europe. No, this is over the course of millions of years, right? This is long-term sustained migration of people groups. It's not a, oh, well, in a few decades they moved up to, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And just do keep in note how they moved across to the C3 from the sort of Turkish regions and down into Asia. Right, it'll be important later. Part of what confuses that, Mark, is that migration wasn't unidirectional. Right, and that's what I'm getting across. That migration can happen bidirectionally. Like you have a group and they migrate out and then they swap populations. Like they still keep in contact. If they migrate out and that population, they're struck by famine, for instance, they might come back to the original population. So of course it's messy. Nothing is simple when it comes to biology and demographics around the world. Nothing's simple. It's all complicated, but we can unsort this by looking at the DNA evidence. And that's what this guy doesn't have. He's just saying, hey, we've got this guy that said he went to the east, so we're going to line that up with an ancient legend in that area. There's no actual documented connection between the legendary people in Scotland and Japheth. There's no connection. It's just assumed.
Japheth, who was known as the Scots. This might be where the name came from for the Scots. Germans, English, Scandinavians all have the same basic descendants. The line goes from Noah, Japheth, Gomer, then to Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz originally settled just south of the Black Sea, and then went to the northern part of the Black Sea. And from there he moved up to Central Europe with 20 of his sons, so a lot of the people in Central and Northern Europe actually were descendants of Ashkenaz. The French, Portuguese, and Celts were known as the Gauls, or Celts. Even the
Yeah, so Scott, I believe, isn't originally Scottish, right? Like, I believe that they referred to themselves as the Gaels. Scotland, I think, was a Norwegian word for the place, right? Like, it's Scot, and it's actually Germanic, it's not Middle Eastern. Like, this is stupid, but their own word for them is Gael, right? They're the Gaels. So why they would be using a word derived from Scythia, they don't even use that word. Like, this is the thing. It's just not understanding that sometimes the word for a population is not from that population. Okay? It's not. This is so weird.
Most were Gaulish people. A lot of the Celts that were in Brittany and the British Isles intermixed with some of the Irish and Scots in those areas. Some of them ended up in Galatia, more in Eastern Europe, and then as far down as Turkey. Greeks descend from Javan, another grandson of Noah. The Old Testament often uses Javan where we would say Greece. We see reflections of this group all throughout these areas around the Mediterranean Sea, Greece, Macedonia, certain parts of Asia Minor. Tarsus in Spain, they were descendants of Javan. They went all over the place.
Yeah, so keep in mind this, right? This is apparently Javan, who apparently went round the Cape of Good Hope and up into the sort of, Southeast Asia. Yeah, this never happened. This did not happen. I will give you the tip right now. Never happened. And we know that from the DNA evidence. That did not happen.
Some of them went as far as Japan. That was a trading outlet for them. Chinese people trace back to the Sinites, descendants of Canaan, who moved out and migrated east to what Ptolemy later called the land of Sinim, or what we call China today.
Nope.
The Japanese may have been influenced by Javan's descendants through trade and are also descendant of the Sinite peoples as they expanded and dominated much of these areas.
Yeah, so keep that in mind as we look at the actual tracing of the Y chromosome haplogroups as it comes out. Now, I probably don't need to tell you, nobody traveled around the Cape of Good Hope, across the Indian Ocean and into the thing. There may have been some transit between Madagascar. Is that Madagascar? That's Madagascar. And the Asian islands, right? People did travel, but the main population came into Asia and then down into Southeast Asia, right? That is what happened. This is ridiculous that a group of people took a journey from Europe all the way round, the way round the Cape of Good Hope, and then moved up into Southeast Asia. Ridiculous. No, absolutely not. No, and the genetic evidence unsurprisingly does not support that. But he's going to get worse, okay? If you thought that was bad, you just wait. He's got way worse. And look, just to be fair, nobody's saying that there weren't populations that moved from the Middle East back into Africa, right? Nobody's saying that. But there was a the oldest haplogroups come from Africa in the first place. The people who were in the Middle East have elements of that haplogroup, while people in Africa don't have elements of the Middle East one. It shows that the original population was in Africa, but I'm not saying populations didn't move back, because they did. So you do get some people with this Middle Eastern haplogroup, absolutely. There was a land bridge back there, not across the Indian Ocean, my friend. In fact, this map, I believe, yes. So it's got the land bridges on it. Okay, so where you can see this grey area, that's where there were either land bridges or ice bridges in that period, right? So in between Japan and China, down throughout Southeast Asia, between Papua New Guinea and Australia, and even across between Russia and Alaska, there's sort of a crossing, right? So it actually has where it was possible to cross the ocean. And there was no crossing in between here. There just wasn't. I'm sorry. There wasn't. That's not to say that people didn't move from Madagascar over, but it would have been later, right? It wasn't that they traveled down there. It would have been later. And we know that they moved from Africa, where it has the basal haplogroup, into Madagascar, and then sort of traded population, right? We know the flow of population. So, you know, that's how it happened. No, that's not exactly what happened. It was that they did travel that way, but that isn't the Kushites. Like, you know, by then, it wasn't like, oh, well, they came from the Middle East. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So if we look at our map, it was the initial haplogroup that came up into the Middle East. Oh, did I not share that? Hold it.
Ethiopia. So it was Noah, Ham, and then Cush. A lot of Ethiopians still call themselves Cushites. They came and settled just below where Mizraim was. A lot of the lower parts of Africa were actually also settled by Cush. Russians and Slavic peoples.
Yeah, so what we know is that there were people already, like, don't get me wrong, people from Middle East went back into Africa as migration happens in all directions, but there were people already living there. They may have settled, but it wasn't like it was completely unoccupied and there's no one around, you know, they're the first people that... No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No.
Traced back to Magog and Meshech. Magog moves up between the Black and Caspian Sea. A lot of the Scythian groups came out of them. The Irish and the Scots would come from them as they migrated to Spain and moved on up. Meshech goes up. They were the northern Russians further. Their language family would include a lot of the Finnish groups, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and some people in Hungary who also share this similar unique language family. What about the Australian Aborigines? Surprisingly, they show genetic connections to the people of Kush and Seba, who traveled through India, Southeast Asia, the Malay Peninsula, and eventually reaching Australia. Our friend, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, has
Yeah, so the native Australian populations is kind of an interesting one because they are the only population to be in a certain haplogroup because of the isolation of Australia. Evolution absolutely explains this perfectly, why they are in such a unique genetic position, because Australia, after those sort of land bridges vanished, they were isolated. Evolution explains this. It absolutely explains this. Now, they did come from sometimes the Asian, right? But do you notice there's a lot of other sort of lines here of population movement, and part of it was from India. So it didn't just go through there and then down. It actually came from a lot of different directions, right? There's a lot of different haplogroups in there. So you just sort of simplifying it to, oh, they went to Asia and then down. No, that isn't what happened, right? You have this sort of line where they come from Africa up the coast, down India, and then around to Australia, following the coast. It wasn't all in one movement. They didn't just appear there, but, you know, they migrated along the coast, probably setting up settlements, you know, moving inland, but other people decided to go further, and even up the coast of Asia. They split off this massive migration. This is how migration works, not just, hey, we've got to get the Kushites in Asia and Australia, so they went to Asia and everybody else went to Australia. No. It's such a ridiculous idea. And, you know, I don't know what they base this on, because it doesn't say any of this in the Bible. All it says is Japheth settled in the east. That far east? Or does it mean east of you know, the Levant? It probably just means the east of Levant. It's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of nonsensical, right? Yeah, so I'll share this tab because it sort of says the Semites, they were born to Shem, right? Shem was the ancestor of all of the Shemites, or the Semites, right? The region where they lived stretched from Mesha towards Separ in the eastern hill country. Is that Australia? Oh, it was the Kushites, right? Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior. He was the mighty warrior. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Urkud, Akkad, and Calnea in Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria. Is that Australia? I wasn't aware that Assyria was Australia, right? This is what it says for Cush. It only talks about the Middle East, right? All of this other stuff where, oh, apparently they moved all the way down to Australia. You just got to make that stuff up, right? This is just the apologetics. You know, if they settled there, how to explain the people in Australia? Oh, well, they must have moved, you know, over from the people who lived about 6,000 years ago. Yeah, right. Sure. So, Cush was sort of he settled the plains between here, and then suddenly he's in Australia with kangaroos and crap. Like, give me a break. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous.
There's a ton of great research on this sort of thing. Definitely go check it out. So you might be wondering, looking at the biblical family trees, why did some people live so long in the ancient past and then those lifespans drop off really after the flood? Well, the answer is because the flood of Noah's day wrecked this world, changed the climate, wrecked...
Yeah, so I think that's because it was a legend that grew, and if you said, hey, my ancestor lived for 30 years and died of cankles, it wasn't as impressive as, oh, my ancestor lived for 900 years and smote all before him. I think it is just that legend building. That's all it needs to be.
The environment, this was real climate change. God told Noah in Genesis 6:13 that he would destroy both the people, but also and the earth. The point of the flood was to wreck this world. Post-flood was a wrecked world, a wrecked climate, a wrecked environment. Probably don't live as long enough.
A wrecked narrative, it makes no sense whatsoever. And yeah, that genetic bottleneck, it doesn't matter how pure your genetics is or whatever. It just doesn't work because you do not have enough genetic diversity to prevent catastrophic errors from occurring. You just don't. No organism, no population of organisms can recover from having a population of 8 members. Doesn't fucking happen. It just doesn't.
Wrecked world. And then the other major issue is genetic bottleneck. At the time of the flood, the human population is reduced down just to 8 people. And so any mutations in their genome rapidly spread to the rest of the population post-flood. Then the Tower of Babel, that's another genetic bottleneck, creating small genetic pools. Again, mutations rapidly spread in those situations. The accumulation of mutations.
Well, I mean, they would have to rapidly spread like crazy. Like, you'd have to have way faster spreading mutations than anything anybody has ever seen before for a short period in order to get them into these different groups. I don't, like, this is sort of ridiculous levels of mutation. I don't understand. It's wild. Because you're sort of saying everyone was the same. Few hundred years, we have people with high melanin content to protect against. That is mutation on an insane level. Like, this is sort of, oh, we don't think mutation can, work over that amount of time, and then suddenly it's hypermutation. What?
Rapidly probably leads to the decreased lifespans, or at least the major cause of it. So what is the point of looking at all these people groups? When we look at where people groups ended up, and we look at their origins, it all aligns with the biblical account, not the evolutionary story / fairy tale. Ancient history
story / fairy tale. It's definitely the scientifically resourced, proven scientific theory that has been the most tested is the fairy tale, while the story with talking snakes and magic fruit, oh, that's the obvious facts. Yeah. No, and talking donkeys, the sun stopping in the sky, the ridiculous horn blowing down walls of a city. No, that's the real truth, and something that we have a mountain of genetic and fossil evidence for. That's just fairy tales. Yeah.
World geography confirmed the Bible's history again and again and again. And guys, this is just a taste of the information out there that confirms the Bible. And why is this important? Well, because so much of our culture has rejected the Bible based on this fairy tale history. They're entrusting man's word over God's word, and thus they've concluded if the Bible's history is wrong, why trust the Bible anywhere else? They've attempted to rewrite human history because, in a sense, as humans, we want to be our own gods. And friends, the idea that people randomly evolved and separate.
This is the thing. Like, I dislike that they're putting intentionality into this. So we're searching for, in science, we are just searching for facts about the natural world. Right? Nobody's trying to become a god or in some way take down your religion or whatever. Like, nobody's trying to do that. It's just we want to get an understanding of the natural world, and that is in conflict with what you believe about. It's not even in conflict with your religion, because there's plenty of Christians that accept, the scientific theory of evolution. Plenty, tons of them, a majority of them. It's just, it conflicts with your beliefs. So instead of, reevaluating your beliefs, whether they're true, they double down on what the book says over reality around them, over the scientific reality, like the actual resourced facts that we've managed to acquire. And that is wild. That is absolutely wild. I just, you can disbelieve it all you want, but we don't just say, well, then we're not going to teach it in science class because your religion has a problem with it. No, it's whatever is scientifically supported. And they say, oh, we're not anti-science. Yes, you are. Because when you start to say, well, there's a scientific methodology, and that's been through the scientific methodology, but we disagree with all of the people that are peer-reviewed and checked it again and again and again, I'm sorry, you're anti-science at that point. You just are. But instead they want to say, no, they don't have the science, we have the science. It's ridiculous. It is childish.
In Africa, there's no real historical support for that. All around the world, cultures kept track of their history. Think about these.
There's no historical support for that. Why would we be doing history on evolution? Like, this is the stupid thing. There's no historical evidence for that. No, there's scientific evidence, which is way better than historical evidence. Right? I mean, if you write down in your diary that you definitely didn't commit a crime, and there is scientific evidence with fingerprints, with all this stuff that you did, which do you think we should believe exactly? The forensic evidence, the scientific evidence, or you wrote it in a book, the historical evidence? Yeah, it's going to be the scientific evidence. That's what we're going to believe, because that's more reliable than what somebody wrote in a friggin' book.
Couple examples, as we've seen earlier already, but the Irish can trace their family tree back to Noah's son Japheth. The Miato people of China, they trace their family tree not only to Noah, they trace their family tree all the way back to dirt, which is awesome.
They don't, nobody's tracing their family tree back to dirt. What the hell? I don't know where this guy's getting him information, but they might have myths that say that dirt was involved. I don't know. Who did he say? They traced their family tree back to dirt?
All the way back to dirt.
That's sand. I'm not sure that qualifies as dirt, but sure.
The Miato people of China, they trace their family tree not only to Noah, they trace their family tree all the way back to dirt.
What? The Mialto people, I'm not familiar with them. They're in China? Mialto people in China? I'm not sure. China? Miao people? Mulam? I don't know what he's talking about here. I think he's talking about these people, the Malao people. They trace all the way back to Noah. I have doubts. Malao people traced back to Noah and then to dirt. What? Okay, so apparently, and this is the AI overview, so take this with a grain of salt. As always, check your information against scientific information and not just what some YouTuber says. But biblical and young earth, certain creationist models and historical biblical frameworks attempt to trace all global ethnicities back to Noah's three sons. Yeah, these theories are based upon theological interpretations of genealogies rather than mainstream genetic or archaeological records. So no, they don't trace their ancestry all the way back to dirt or Noah or anything of the sort. This guy is so weird. Stop the Stupidity with 5 readerships. Thank you, Stop the Stupidity. You are a champ. You are great. Maybe I'm not going to trace you back to dirt. Okay, you are traced back to awesome. All right, you evolved from awesome. I will say that. Those go out to Merc Time, Dave, Cannabis, Bambi, Steve Fisher, and MFT Raw. Winners, chicken dinners, enjoy your emotes and other benefits. Thank you so much, Stop the Stupidity. You are a winner in my book, which is a very small book because people irritate me. Especially this guy. I mean, damn. Trace your lineage back to dirt. How did they do that exactly? Like, how did they do it? Did they take a DNA swab of their, a population in China and then take a DNA swab of dirt? Like, how did they do that exactly? Or is it that you found somebody in their ancestry whose name sounded maybe vaguely like somebody else's name, and you say, oh, that person was... I don't know. I don't know. It's wild, right? I feel like they're making this stuff up, but Stop the Stupidity knows that. And as always, please stop the stupidity. Holy crap. Holy crap. Are we sure Noah wasn't dirt? No, they're talking about Adam. They're talking about Adam being made from, it depends on the translation, but dust or dirt, basically, you know.
Which is awesome, right? But it seems to have a biblical reference because Adam was made from the dirt. And there are other amazing confirmations of the Bible's history in regards to the Tower of Babel. There are similar structures, ziggurats, mounds, pyramids, all over the world.
Yeah, you know what? You know when you're building in sort of Stone Age, Iron Age, Bronze Age, and you want to build a really stable structure, do you know what's a good way to do that? A pyramid. Yeah, it's a very stable structure when you're making it out of tons and tons of stone. Pyramid's really stable. It's not surprising, but they're all architecturally pretty different.
It's like humanity was all together, got the same idea, spread out and built their own version of that thing in different places. The Bible explains this. And of the thousands of languages we...
No, it's just that pyramids are very stable. They've got a wide base and a smaller top. They last for a long time because they're, you know, structurally sound. And my guy, it's not a conspiracy if they all learnt it in the Middle East, and it's just that structure is very stable. My God.
Today, most language experts agree you can trace all of them back to around 70-ish original family languages. That number fits well the numbers that dispersed at the time of the Tower of Babel. And guys, Scripture, God's Word, it gives us names, timelines, geography that makes sense and aligns with all the other human historical accounts and genealogies that we cover. So the Tower of Babel was a real event. That explains the vast people groups and languages we see in the world today. And you know what? Again, if the Bible's history is true, the gospel in that history is also true. And we could talk for hours about the Tower of Babel and languages around the world, but don't miss Christ in all this.
Yeah, I don't see Christ in all of this. This is the Old Testament, my guy. It you know, and this is sort of saying, hey, if the scientific facts are in dispute with your religious belief, ignore them and just look to Christ. Just don't look at them too closely because they don't make a lot of sense. They don't match up with the scientific evidence. So ignore them. Just turn to Jesus. Just believe it anyway, regardless of how ridiculous it is.
Don't miss the focus of the Bible. You see, biblical history is really focused on Jesus. And really, the Tower of Babel reminds us of that. You know,
well, no, not the Old Testament. The Old Testament is not focused on Jesus at all. If anything, it's focused upon Moses, let's face it. You know, I don't know how, like, you know, he's talking about the Bible like it was originally one book that's all focused on Jesus. It's not. It's a compilation of stories, some older, some newer, and put together in two vague sections of Old Testament, New Testament, and has the Old Testament is a collection of stories. That's all it is. It's not even different accounts of one narrative like the New Testament or the Gospels are, for instance. It is literally just a collection of old stories.
Here at Answers in Genesis, we use the 7 C's to summarize biblical history. You got creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion, Tower of Babel, and then we get to Christ, cross, and consummation, the summary of the gospel. But you see, as we summarize that history, we get to confusion, the 4th C. That is the Tower of Babel. And there's a lot of history between confusion and Christ. And what you're seeing in the Old Testament is from those nations that God spread out, he calls Abraham. And from Abraham's descendants, he builds a nation. And from that nation comes the Messiah who provides salvation for our souls.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had Joseph. And there was all kinds of shenanigans along the way. It's not as clear-cut as, oh, Abraham was supposed to make a nation and that from that comes Christ. You know, if you go through the narrative of exile in Babylon and all of that stuff, like, they're not, you know, they're not trying to make a nation so Christ can come. It's that they had a lot of problems and they thought their Messiah would come to break them out of it, which he kind of didn't, right? Like, by the time Jesus died, they were still occupied by Rome. In fact, very soon after Jesus' death, there was the first Jewish-Roman war, which did not end well for the Jewish people. So, you know, but it all depends on your interpretation, right?
we repent and put our faith in him. This all goes back to the biblical truth. We all descend from Adam. That's why we all need saving through the last Adam, Jesus Christ. But all of biblical history is pointing to the Messiah to come. And this event reminds us of that. And also note, as you look at the Tower of Babel, in a sense, it's a mild judgment on man's sin. You see, not too long before the Tower of Babel was the global flood, where God sent the global judgment on man's sin because of man's wicked hearts, only evil all the time. At the Tower of Babel, man is rebelling against God, refusing to spread out like God told him.
Okay, so what we have here, and this is apparently the narrative, and see if this makes sense. So during the time of Noah, everyone was so wicked and evil and everything. In order to correct that, God flooded the entire world except for 8 people, who 100 years later, their descendants, and presumably because Noah lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, he was around at the time, maybe, I don't know, their people were then rebellious again. So God failed to correct the world. It didn't last, like it lasted for about 100 years and then they were back to their old tricks. So what did God accomplish by the flood? Right? If humans were sinful by nature and they needed to be wiped out, and God wiped them out to correct that, he didn't correct anything. I mean, right after the flood, Noah is cursing Ham because he did the wrong thing as well. Right? He told his brothers about his father instead of covering him. It's ridiculous. So what did God actually accomplish? God failed. And that's the point. If you put into policy a solution for a entire species that lasts 100 years and then fail, like you've completely failed in your mission. I would expect a law to be effective for 100 years, created by humans, much less a solution presented by a god.
To do. So God confuses their languages so they can't join together in their evil endeavors, and to keep them focused on just really kind of surviving for a while. And so it's a mild judgment for the good of mankind and for the glory of God. But you note this, that this separation via language won't last forever. You see, Jesus Christ came, God became flesh. He lived a perfect life. He died on the cross. He rose from the grave, defeating death. And then in Acts, we see now.
Oh, it's a levitating, it's super Jesus. He's levitating.
Acts chapters 1 and 2, you have Pentecost. The different languages come back together again. And then we see in the new heavens and new earth, we will worship together in one language, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb."
Yeah, and that's true, Jinx. Yes, sun-dried bricks, the lack of steel that they had. Yeah, gotcha. With modern bricks, yeah, we can't unless you do something like, I don't know, make a pyramid. We can achieve it because that's an incredibly stable structure. Strangely enough,
they cry out in a loud voice, one language, worshiping our God in perfection. Guys, don't fall for the mythological fairy tale history our culture has embraced and is trying to push on you. Dig into real history.
Like the pot calling the kettle black. So he's basically pointing at all of the scientific evidence saying, it's a myth, it's a fairy tale. But wait, come and listen to my story about this talking snake that tricked a woman into eating a magic fruit, and therefore you've got to do all of these things that this priest tells you, or else you'll be burned as a sacrifice forever. Oh, but that's mythology with all of the genetic evidence and all of the fossil evidence. No, that's mythology and fairy tale. But trust me on the talking snake. Answers in Genesis. What is wrong with you? Seriously.
History, God's word, God's history, starting in Genesis. Trust the word of God. And more than anything else, trust in Christ, who stepped into our family line to redeem us from our sin.
Never met Christ, don't know if I should trust him. He's never appeared to me. If he has a problem with what I'm doing, and my camera's gone fuzzy again, give me 1 second. He can definitely talk to me and tell me, but as yet, no problems whatsoever, apparently. Jesus never had an issue with me. So, yeah, so that's Answers in Genesis. And the thing that makes me really laugh is the idea of people promoting that a book full of talking animals and, fantastical elements people rising from the dead, people summoning spirits, and God striking. Like, all of this is real fact, while the science we have is fairy tales. That is just a ridiculous statement. I'm really sorry. Snakes don't speak, donkeys don't speak, angels don't speak. None of this is true. All right, it's just a story. And it's a story that's been around for a long time, sure, but that doesn't make it more true. Right? Like, that, it's got nothing to do with it. And it's like, the Bible is an important book. It gives you a look into the mindset of the people, what they understood, how they described the world around them. It's important. But important doesn't mean the same as true. And every time science has gone up against a story from a book, the story from the book loses. And we are discovering more and more and more about how life is all intertwined and how genetic information really gets around. It's actually quite fascinating. And you can sort of go, oh, well, that's my belief. Sure, you're entitled to it. But in science, we teach science, not your fantasy. Okay, we teach science. So the way to get your story into science is publish a paper on it. Get that peer-reviewed in a correct journal and not some random journal with nothing to do with the subject, and get it accepted by the mainstream scientific institutions that have an abundance, an overwhelming amount of knowledge in these areas. Because I can sort of point out things that I know. I'm not an expert. If somebody familiar in evolutionary biology came on and said, hey, you're wrong about this, I would probably trust their judgment being an evolutionary biologist. But, this is the consensus view that everybody agrees on except for you guys because it disagrees with your book. And that is a ridiculous reason for saying, hey, we should teach this in science because the scientific view doesn't agree with my holy book. So what? So what? Big freaking deal. You can go to theology class and learn it all you want. You can't put it in science class. No. Bad answers in Genesis. And the way to get it in science class is not to crowd pressure your religious believers into making a big deal about it. No. No. That is ridiculous. At least Darwin presented his findings and then argued the merits of the science. All right, that's how he got his accepted. Do the same. Be better. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I've actually found it hilarious. I always find Answers in Genesis stuff hilarious. The sort of way they project. Oh, this is a history book while your science is fairy tales. Yeah, no history book has talking snakes in it. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Angels with flaming swords just is not in any history book. I'm sorry, it isn't. Magic fruit. Not in history books, okay? That isn't history. That is solidly mythology. Now, there might be true elements about it, but you have to show that, not just say, hey, this is now history. We will now take no questions and accept this as fact. No, I'm sorry, no. But if you have enjoyed this and have enjoyed this presentation of why Answers in Genesis are scientifically illiterate and trying to... stolen valor science, and stolen beaker, I think it is at this point. You're basically stealing the word science and saying, no, we're scientific, what about you? It's ridiculous, it's annoying, and it's quite frankly, it's absurd. It's absurd, right? You have, scientific papers talking about genetics of haplogroups, how they spread out and how we know where they spread out. And these guys go, we got a book that says different. It is ridiculous. So yeah, I always have a laugh, but if you've enjoyed this, please give it a like, subscribe, and share. I really would appreciate it. I will try and get some more stuff out soon. I do want to really grow the channel, and if you could help me get to 3K, I would be eternally, well, I would until the end of my life be grateful. I'm not sure if I am eternal. I guess I'll find out at some point, but hey, worst case scenario, I'm just not here anymore. That'd be great. Then I wouldn't have to put up with all this absurd crap. But thank you so much for joining me. It's been a blast. I've really enjoyed your comments. Do take care. Be kind to yourself. If you are a creationist and you believe this, please be kind to yourself. We're all convinced of things that are not true, what sounds like it's a good idea or what people have told us when we're younger. You know, it's no shame to say, hey, yeah, I believe this stuff, and hey, you know, it's just a story. It's okay. It's all right. Yeah, Brenta, my accent is Australian, yes. But it's on the west of Australia, so it's kind of different than your usual Australian. Usually you will hear people from Sydney and Melbourne, which is the east coast, where I'm west coast. So again, this is how languages work. It isn't a magical event by some creator of the universe. It's populations separate, create different words, those form different dialects, those separate into different languages. This happens constantly. Like my dialect is definitely slightly different than Eastern Australia, but that's okay. I'm still Australian, all right. I still wrestle snakes in my sleep, all right. That's what I do, by crikey. Yeah, but thank you so much, everybody. Do take care. Be kind to each other, right? Like if somebody believes something that is obviously ridiculous, don't mock them for it. They might have been raised in that environment. They might have, you know, these people are doing a lot to put across the narrative and really brainwash these people into, no, don't believe science, believe your book. And that's a problem, right? So be kind to them. If they do say, hey, I have my doubts, don't mock them for it. You know, don't say, yeah, you believe in a magic clay. I know I kind of mock, but, you know, I think if they are willing to listen to evidence, definitely, you know, say, it's okay. I understand you might have believed this. It is kind of ridiculous, but hey. Anyway, do take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.
To what new horizons can we look now? Where are tomorrow's opportunities? The frontiers of the future are not on any map. But now, what's ahead of us?